Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Hacker Refactor Byte session. My name is Nathan, and I'm doing the intro bit. Byte sessions are a place for us to learn, teach, and to practice public speaking. When in the Colab space, please present yourself in a professional manner. Using the Colab space is a privilege, not a right. We want to make sure that we can keep it. Byte sessions are a pro dev opportunity, so you can go ahead and check that box off if any of your classes require it. If you haven't already, please make sure to sign in to the session. It helps us show the school that we are providing service that people like to go to. It helps us get funding. We'd really appreciate it. Today, I'm happy to introduce Kameron Keller. He's going to be showing us how to build Python GUI applications, which is pretty cool. He also helps set up our event stuff on Discord, and we really appreciate that. So please help me give him a warm welcome. And welcome, Cameron.
Thank you. Good Zoom. Okay, so I believe that there are no courses at OSU Cascades that teach how to actually package an application or build a GUI, graphical user interface. And I'm no expert at this, but I just explored it a little bit and thought I'd share what I learned so that maybe if we need to ever build something in our careers, we have a little bit of insight. So let's start with a little scenario. Say we have a coworker, not so savvy Jimbo, and one of his tasks has been to sort of anonymize some spreadsheet data. So all that Jimbo has to do is just leave the first initial of the last name in the spreadsheet column just to make it a little more anonymous. But he's been doing it by hand, hundreds of records, and he doesn't know how Excel works and can't figure it out. So we've been tasked with building him an application that can automate this part of his job. So I'm going to show you building a really simple graphical user interface, and then also how you can package that application so it's no longer a command line application, but something you could take with, or you could send to Jimbo and he could just double click on his computer. So first thing here, so I built this simple Python application called name converter that you can pass an input file, a CSV file, and it will produce your output. So let's do a little demo of that first with this much larger. Right. With this bigger too. Okay. So I'm not going to go into this code much because it's not really what I'm after today here. But I built a class that takes an input file. You can give it what you want the output file to be, and then it's just reading through that file and replacing that last name with the first character of that last name. So really just grabbing the input path, grabbing what we want the output path to be, and then passing that to our data anonymizer class. So here's our data, just random generated data that I'm using. And if I do Python 3 main converter, and I'm going to call it output.csv, you can see that all the last names have been replaced. But Jimbo does not know how to use command line application at all. So yeah, what can we do? What can we do for Jimbo? So there's many different ways you can build a GUI with a Python application, and I'm sure any other programming language also has many different ways. I do want to suggest a workflow if you are going to go down this path. You sort of have to start with the end in mind and know who your target audience is, because that's going to dictate how you choose your tools, which is going to dictate how you build your app. If you go the other way, if you build it first, you're going to probably realize that ways you wanted to do things aren't going to work in a different setting. So let's take a look at what Python officially gives us. Okay, so there's a couple different ways. You can do a native application that runs on your computer. You could do a Python application that runs in your browser. Well, this is all different frameworks for just graphical user interfaces that you could use. So the sky's the limit, I guess, is really what I'm getting at. So there is a built-in framework that Python's adopted as their built-in one. That's what we're going to use today. I like that because it has less setup. I can just import it. So it's called tkinter, which, great name. tkinter, short for TK interface. TK is a tool that Python has used to implement their GUI thing. So you can verify that it's installed on your computer with just open up a REPL with typing Python in your command line and then try and import it. And if it works, you have it. If it doesn't, you don't have it. I did learn that I installed Python on this machine with Homebrew, which conveniently doesn't install tkinter with it. So I had to install that separately. If you install Python from official Python source, you will get it by default. Okay, so to demo a basic GUI, let's see if I have anything. Okay, well. So import your framework. You're going to create this root object, which is basically your main window. You can assign it a title, a minimum size. And in this really simple example, I'm just giving it a button. And the button does nothing. Finally, you have to there's different ways you can display they call them widgets in tkinter. There's different ways you can display those. Pack just fits it all into as small of a window as possible. It's pretty ugly, but it's also easy. There's a grid. There's different ways you can do it. I'm not going to cover that because it seems like you can just keep going deeper and deeper, and I wanted to keep it simple today. So finally, there's this main loop. This is an event loop similar to a browser. Browsers often use. And so as soon as I run this code's just going to keep running until I exit it. And the event loop allows it to update as things change in your application. Would any of you all like me to post this code in the Discord? Okay. Let's do that. What's that? Okay. This one. There we go. So let's go ahead and run this. So to run this code, I'm just going to do Python 3 and then the name of my file. And it's probably is pretty small on there, but window pops open and there's a button I can click, and there you go. Very first graphical user interface. Okay. So this basic workflow is what we're going to use for creating the rest of our application. We're going to create an object that does something we want, and then we're going to pack it, which just adds it. I think it just adds it into that event loop. So I am going to switch to my code that does what we want for Jimbo. Okay. So my main doesn't look too much different. Still creating a root window, giving it a title, giving it a size. I've incorporated my data anonymizer class here. So it turns out you need, with the graphical user interface, there's two ways you can have variables. One is global variables, which is not ideal, and the other is to use classes. So you'll see that I passed in my class data anonymizer to my graphical user interface. I'll explain a little more why in a second. So this user interface, I'm giving it the root window and the data anonymizer, and I'm starting the main loop. So let's talk about the user interface here. Okay. So here's my constructor. I'm just assigning those objects. And then this is doing the meat of this. If I were to build a bigger application, I would break this down into smaller pieces, maybe more classes, more functions. But this is a fairly simple example. So let me actually go ahead and open up what this looks like. So that it's so tiny. Can't make it bigger. Well, you can see sort of what we have going on there. So I've got a button, I've got a text field, another button, a text field, entry box, another button, a text field, and then like a final sort of go button. So that follows this order here. I created a button for selecting the CSV, the label, destination, and so on. So at the end of this, I'll post this code so you can see, take a look at it for yourself. But for example, a button, you can assign a command to it, which is a function. So when you press that button, that function runs. So you see that on any of these buttons, I have commands set. You see some other things like just the text for the button. And then I want to talk about this text entry box here. So you can assign this entry box a variable, which is where that data is going to get stored once that code runs. And this is why classes are really helpful, because otherwise this would have to be a global variable for it to work correctly, because the main loop is running down here in my main. If I want classes, I can do that. Or so, all right. Labels are just text on the screen. And then, yeah, so if we look at this open file command, so what I'm doing here is I'm using this file dialog command from TK, and it has a function called ask open file name. And whatever the output of that is, I'm going to store in my anonymizer class. And then I'm going to update the label beneath it to show that path. So to demonstrate, if I hit select, it opens up, pops that open. If I want to grab my data, it populates it in there. The select destination is basically the same. Where do I want to save my output data is what I'm after there. I'm going to save it in my application folder. And then I want to give it a name. So I'm going to call it output 1. And then I'm using a button here to actually grab that name from that text entry. And here you can sort of see that it did indeed grab it. So if I hit anonymize data now, you see it popped up my file right there. And so there's a user interface now on the application. Let's see if there's anything else here. I did have to modify very slightly my class to make this work. Primarily, I just added a variable for the name of the file and the path of the destination file. Because when you're in the command line, Python assumes you're working in that directory. But when I went into this graphical user interface, it just thought I was working out of my root directory. And so I needed to actually specify where to save that file. Otherwise, this class, I think I left pretty much the same. And then, yeah, these functions are all basically the same, just slight variations to do what's needed. So this is great, except it's still running on my command line. You can see that my prompt hasn't returned. It's waiting for that window to close. And I also had to launch it through command line, which Jimbo does not like the command line. So that brings up the question of packaging a Python application. Like the graphical user interface, there's a ton of different ways to do this. And this is why it matters so much to think ahead of time. You know, if you can do pip install, and that's installing someone else's code on your computer, but you're probably using it in an application. There's one way you could distribute. You're going to build that differently than you would, say, packaging this program for Jimbo. So Python documentation has this cool image here. They talk about how you could install the program on a piece of hardware and deliver that to Jimbo, and that would be one way of distributing your application. You could put it in a container like a Docker image and distribute it that way. You can like the way I'm going to show is, I believe, under this freezers method, where it's basically going to save all your code into one place, including Python itself, and then you can distribute just an application. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. The documentation talks about it. Service platforms, web browsers. There's Windows specific, there's Mac specific, there's cross-platform. Basically, if you know what you want to do, start there and then start digging into how to do that. I'm going to show this cross-platform application called PyInstaller, which is pretty slick. So PyInstaller, you can install with pip on the command line. And then to use it, you just call it from the command line. In this case, we want it to generate one file that can be used. And because this is a windowed application, I had to specify that. So let's demonstrate that. PyInstaller, one file. Make sure I get this. Windowed. And my script was called name converter. Take a minute to run. So the cool thing about this is Jimbo doesn't have to have Python on his computer. He doesn't have to have tkinter installed or any other dependency that you've used with your Python application. It just grabs it all and mashes it together. So if we look at File Explorer here, I don't know if I can make this a little bigger. So PyInstaller created this folder dist disk like distribution. There's two files in here. One is the one that launches the same application from the command line, which is helpful for debugging, or like if you have print statements, then you can see those print statements. But the other is just like a completely contained icon that you can click on. So if we click on that, you see it opens right up. And this file here, if I just say copied it and pasted it in my email and sent it to Jimbo, he could download it and in theory run it. I haven't tested that on one computer, but one thing I will say about PyInstaller, there's this limitation where you have to run it on the desired destination operating system. So I have the Mac, that bundle that it made, if I send it to Nathan's Windows, it wouldn't run. So I would have to have maybe either a virtual machine or a Windows computer to run this code on as well. Hopefully that matches Jimbo's operating system, and then run PyInstaller, and then that would be my file. I believe there are ways where if you are truly making a cross-platform app and you're trying to develop it on one machine, you can, but I think there's just more, there adds many more steps. So, so that is building a Python GUI and packaging it. The documentation for tkinter is vast. There's a lot to it. And I went really simple, as simple as I could. But you can make them nice. You can change the themes. There's much larger GUI frameworks that can handle a lot more than I believe tkinter can. But any questions?
I think that was an awesome presentation. One thing, it's more of a common question.
Yes.
One of the really common things that I've heard like from a lot of people is that like packaging Python is like really challenging for like when you want to actually just do useful things. But that seems pretty remarkably simple. Like for a lot of applications, it looks like it's something that you could do pretty easily.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. On Python's documentation here, packaging in Python has a bit of a reputation for being a bumpy ride. I think it depends on the complexity of the project you're trying to do. This application is not very dynamic. It's like select a few files and then let the backend basically generate. But I think if you were trying to, I'm sorry, you were talking about packaging. Yeah, PyInstaller was really easy. I imagine the more dependencies you have, the more operating systems you're trying to support, probably gets more complex. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised how easy I installed it. Yeah.
Builds an error processing, like if someone pulls up a file and tried to input something that wasn't saved in the file. In your little window, and they try to attach like this thing instead. Does it give any sort of warning?
Let's find out. I don't think so. So it's probably just gonna, I don't know what it'll do. Test. Just nothing. So if you wanted that, you would have to build it. That would be where this is going to open a command line window and then open the application. Let's see what happens there. Yeah. Can't decode a screenshot. So you would have to build that into your interface. Maybe there's some built-in things, but I haven't dug that deep yet.
And then the other thing, like question.
Yeah.
Does this have to do with the work that you're doing for airport?
That's what inspired this. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was just thinking, if you send it to Jumbo, and then he sends to the computer, and he's your client from 5 years ago, and he's like, hey,
Yeah.
this fancy new machine.
Right.
Then like, how do you help them?
Right.
Repackage it all and send it to him again?
It's
Saying it again.
yeah. So I think so as I've thought through this problem, this question, I think this is why the software business model of licenses was such a big thing for so long. It's like, okay, you get this 1-year license, or you get this current supported version, and it only supports this operating system. If you update, you have to buy it again, which covers the time that it's going to take to fix it for your new system. I also think this is why the world has gone so much more cloud-based. If I distributed this on a website that Jimbo could visit, if he had a problem, I could update it from my computer, and I don't have to worry about hardly worry about what machine he has. As long as he has a working browser that's somewhat up to date, probably is going to work. So, but then you have cloud hosting, and who's going to pay for that? Are you going to charge your client monthly, or are you going to eat the cost of the cloud hosting because you know it's not going to cost you that much, and you're going to charge them enough that you're not too worried about it? Or maybe you already have a server that you own that's running and you're already paying for it, and you can just deploy it onto there. So I think it's not that simple of a question. I think it's almost like a business decision at that point of long-term, what's this look like and what's support look like? I think the cloud-based is a good option, except for now you have to maintain a server. So for something like this, I think for somebody like Jimbo, this would be great. Just like one little application that he can just open. If his internet doesn't work, he can open it, you know. So, yeah.
My brother's in, he said something like this while they,
Yeah,
and take this, sometimes it'd be like,
totally.
blow his mind.
It could easily be like a calculator, like if he's always calculating the radius of this angle of this. Yeah,
You would make your own password keeping it easily.
totally. Yeah.
Give it to people too. People like a lot of free password keeping apps, you know, charging people for password keeping services. and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Although I'm up to like, I don't know, your different passwords. or something.
Totally.
Be a really great way to like introduce vulnerabilities just for yourself. Right, but like, I don't think I would want to make my own custom, yeah, if I don't trust myself to make it secure.
Well, I mean, if you're hosting it on your own, you know, if it's just a local application
Yeah,
and it's not actually connected to the internet, it sounds pretty secure unless people are, you know,
unless
around
some,
on your computer.
yeah, someone,
Well, try to have a pocket.
Yeah.
that's, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if main campus has a class on building like this side of applications, because it's crazy to me that this hasn't been talked about. I mean, web dev, but not just like, what if you want to build an enterprise application that, yeah, so
3/4 of Python. Never go.
yeah, no one told me either. I had to just fine, do it myself. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Cameron.
Well,
Good. So.